It all started 5 years ago. Quite by accident, I founded a village we called Circumstances, which had no corporate status. It now had a population of 349 people. I was lucky. I had just unloaded another trailer in Texas with branded bandages that needed to be sterilized before being shipped to the retail market. I called and reported that everything was clear. The dispatcher instructed me to pick up the load so I could get home 2 days early. Since I had a dangerous weapons license, I was one of the few who could do the job. It was only a half-hour drive to the pickup point. So I hit the road, filled the tanks as I went. Once everything was loaded, I hit the road. The delivery point was only an hour away from home. I was already on the road when I confirmed the load was complete. I was paid twice as much as I should have been paid for this shipment. Instead of following the predetermined route, I took a shortcut across the country, not only reducing miles but also saving time. I was now less than 2 hours away from home. As a result, I was running 5 or 6 hours ahead. I had stopped at the intersection of two country roads when I saw a handwritten sign that read, "For sale before county taken." It had an arrow pointing to the right, and I followed it. 2 signs along the road led me to a farmer's yard. It was an elderly couple who were retired due to age. I figured they were in their late 70s. Their land was leased to farmers in the county, but as prices rose, they were delinquent on their taxes. They loved the farm and were not ready to sell it and move to town, so they had to sell some of the land. I called my father, who took over. Using a family trust, we bought the farm at fair market value and allowed them to rent the house long-term with low rent. They were thrilled with this and said, if I ever needed a favor, to let them call. I had my father carve out and subdivide 10 acres at the crossroads from the original 200-acre farm. It was the perfect place to build a store and gas station, as the nearest major city was about an hour away. As soon as I left, I suggested that my father come and look at the place and try to buy the adjoining land around the intersection as cheaply as possible. He did so, and somehow we got 10 acres on each corner of the crossroads. In his search for water, my father discovered that there was an underground river running through the farm that would happily provide water for 50,000 people. He decided to tap into it to supply our new commercial endeavor. Just as I was pulling up to the house to make a reservation, the dispatcher hustled again, and I happily agreed. I ended up getting home at the usual time. 6 months later, I dropped off the load at 5 in the morning that Wednesday 12 hours before the workday started and parked the truck and trailer in the company yard, taking the keys to my freshly painted old Ford to the dispatch office. Knowing that in the near future there would be rakes coming at me for violating state and federal driving hour laws. Because of the breakdown, I was on the road for 16 days. That's why I was trying so hard to get home. That meant the person who replaced me had 2 extra days off. The cab would be in the shop for inspection and would be ready for use in a couple hours. They wanted to make sure it was repaired properly. The other driver was informed that he was due to arrive. He was scheduled to be on the road by 9 o'clock. I told my wife I would be home for dinner. Marcy had taken the kids and was looking forward to seeing me. Some time ago, I had pulled the engine out of the old Ford truck because it was dead, and in my spare time, I had taken to restoring the frame and body, as the interior was still in good condition. Before I went on my last 2-week run, I paid a local paint shop to repaint all the metal parts outside and inside. When they were done reassembling the interior, they had to call Jameson's Auto to pick up the car. After installing the new engine and checking everything, Jameson's left the keys to the truck with the dispatcher, knowing that I would pick it up when I got home. After the paint job, the old truck looked as good as new. The old red truck turned completely black. Even the bumpers became chrome. The back door had the word Ford written on it in white paint, just like the original. Now I could put collector license plates on it if I wanted to. I was coming home 10 hours early and decided it would be a nice surprise for my wife. She didn't start work until 9. So, I started the car and headed for home. I couldn't wait to see my wife and our 2 daughters after 16 days on the road. It was about 8 in the morning when I drove down our street to the house and discovered a car in the driveway that shouldn't be there. I immediately realized whose car it was. It was the pride and joy of the youngest son of the owner of our transportation company. When I was on the road, he was off, as we both rode in the same cab. In many ways, we were complete opposites. He had a reputation as the black sheep of the family. Most truckers thought he was an unbelievable cocky guy with a big mouth. I pulled over to the side of the road and just watched him. I wanted to know why he was in front of our house and where my wife's car was. My heart was torn apart when I saw my wife Marcy and Jack Redding and our 2 children coming out of the house. In his right hand was the bag that we drivers always carried with us. It contained all the necessities of the road. The girls somehow missed the bus to school, so they went to get them. I took a video of them with my cell phone. I filmed Marcy and Jack stopping in a loving hug behind the kids before loading them into the car. It was clear that what was happening had been going on for quite some time. Marcy and Jack didn't seem bothered by being caught out in public. They looked like they were just another happy family. They passed me by, completely oblivious to who I was. As I realized, my wife no longer recognized my restored truck, and since I wasn't going home, didn't look for me. I watched them in the rearview mirror as they turned the corner. I pulled up to our 3-bedroom house and prepared to see what else I could find. I found that our 2 children's bedrooms were the same as they had always been. So was our bedroom. My wife's clothes were in their proper places, as were mine. Even our bed was made, which was a little unusual because the kids had missed the bus. Nothing seemed out of place yet. If they had spent the night together, where were the leftovers that could serve as documentary evidence? I was now sure. If they weren't involved, then he had no reason to be here. I looked around twice, but my intuition still told me to keep looking. There was nothing conspicuous from the upstairs basement. The dishwasher was full of dirty dishes and needed to be run. And then I noticed that there was a light on under the door to the unfinished 3rd floor. It made me laugh because it wasn't supposed to be. We hung old curtains and kept them closed. It became a sort of attic where we put things we no longer used. I hadn't gone up there in years. My first thought was that Marcy had gone up there for some reason and forgot to turn off the light. Curiosity took me. I had to find out why there was light coming in under the door. As I climbed the stairs and opened the door, I discovered that the entire floor was already completely finished. I was shocked. The morning light was caused by someone leaving a curtain open. When I was home, they were always closed. The problem was that it couldn't even be started because my loving wife Marcy and I couldn't agree on what to do with it. Now I knew why. Why was this room finished, and who was using it? It had its own bedroom, larger than my wife and I had downstairs, huge walk-in closets on either side of the master bathroom, and a separate sitting area with its own TV and DVD player. On a small table were movies that my wife would never watch or allow me to watch. However, when I turned on the TV and pressed the play button on the DVD remote, the video started playing. I was stunned to discover that my wife was having fun with some guy. Across the room on the coffee table was a handmade card that read, "We love you, Uncle Jake," signed by my 2 children. My fear had become a reality. Not only was he my wife's lover, but it looked like he was trying to take my children away from me. Take away my family. The double bed was all slept on and unmade. There was a new set of baby dolls lying on the floor that I had never seen before, which meant she was in a big hurry this morning. Looking around the dressing rooms, I found that one part held clothes that I assumed must be his, because they were definitely too big for me. The other held women's clothes that I recognized as hers. Hanging there were several very sensual evening gowns that she had never worn for me. I had no more doubts. Marcy and Jack were lovers. At night, I began to realize that there was another side to her personality that she wouldn't let me see. It made it clear that in her eyes, I had always been her second choice. What did my children know about all of this? Using my cell phone, I videotaped everything I discovered. I picked up his shirt and took a picture of myself wearing it in the mirror to prove that it was too big for me. My attention was drawn to a framed picture of him with his mother and father. I made a detailed note of everything that happened in the room. Then I stopped and saved the recording. Seeing the television again, I rewound the disc and recorded an image on the screen that showed a man. It was Jack Redding, my boss's son. This was the second clip I had saved. I decided I now had all the proof I needed. Going down to the basement, I grabbed our 3-person luggage and started packing all my clothes. Eventually, I returned to the 3rd floor to retrieve the disc on which their videotape had been recorded. I packed it into one of the suitcases. When I was done, I set them by the front door. I would come back for them later. I had a few more important things to do. I called my father and asked how soon we could open the new store. He replied that he was already building it with a 2nd floor for a 2-bedroom apartment. According to him, I am looking for a regional manager to manage the whole process. The chain I am working with has franchised us, which will help us a lot. It will take another month and a half to finish construction and a month after that to get everything set up. Why? I will run it by my father and live in an apartment. Get me a good civil and divorce lawyer. I said I would talk to him a little later and give him the details of what is going on. I called the farmer we bought the farm from and asked if I could rent a room from him until construction was finished. The room I rented, but he said your money is not good enough. No matter how hard I tried, he refused to accept the money because he thought he and his wife owed a lot to my family. I said I would come the next day. At 10 in the morning, I was at the transportation center, sitting in my boss's office and informing him that I was quitting without the usual notice. He just had to ask me why, and I didn't feel good about telling him that. I showed him a videotape of the room as a whole, and then the pictures I took afterward. The last one was a framed picture of his wife and himself with his son. "Heath, where did you get that?" asked Jace. I explained that it was the 3rd floor of my house and it wasn't supposed to be finished. His face was as white as freshly fallen snow. And then I showed him a clip of his son Jack entertaining a woman. Jace, a Christian, watched it and said, "My God, that's disgusting." I said, "The woman's name is Marcy. That's why I'm leaving. Marcy is my wife." This clip was created in a private room on the 3rd floor with the help of a 3rd person. I didn't know what to think, so I said, "I'm sorry, but because of the behavior of your sons and my wife, I have no choice. I have to give up driving to have a chance at getting custody of my 2 daughters in the divorce." He called the accountant to write me one last check and add a $10,000 bonus for what my son did. Don't say anything to anyone and get to my office as soon as possible. "Are the children his or yours?" asked Jace Redding gravely. "They both look like Marcy." "I think it's them, as I don't think the affair has been going on for a long time," replied I. "We've been hearing things for a long time, Heath," said Jace Redding. "The only way to find out is to do a DNA test." "I suggest you ask your son Jack for that," I said sadly. "Please don't say anything to anyone. I want Marcy to find out for herself tonight that I know what's going on." "Just so you know, Heath, I don't approve of what my son did. When he comes back in 2 weeks, he'll be gone. We've long heard rumors that he was having an affair with a married woman he regularly engaged in activities with behind her husband's back, but we never had any proof. We just thought he was ranting to the other drivers," Jace said solemnly. "Now I'm sorry he did that to a good man like you. I didn't realize he had moved into your house," he continued. "But you both work, so it's easy to see how it could have gone on for so long without anyone knowing." Much later, I would find out that Jace kept his word. Not only did he fire him, but he cut him out of his will because he had dishonored the family name by ruining someone else's marriage. Jace couldn't bear the fact that this had happened to one of his own employees whom he had long trusted. To him, it was evidence that his own son didn't care about anything or anyone. After cashing the check, clearing all of our joint accounts, and paying the bill at Jameson's Auto, I headed off to my children's elementary school. After a lengthy discussion with the counselor, the kids were called out of class to talk to me. She started to walk away to leave us alone. I said, "It's probably best if you stay. I don't want to be in a position where I could be accused of trying to manipulate our children." She asked if I was so sure of that. I replied, "In this case, yes, Because my wife Marcy is a state social worker. Miss Connor's eyes reflected shock. I learned that their new Uncle Jake had been renting the upstairs apartment for 3 years. He had kept to himself at first, but over time he seemed to have become part of the family. Marcy introduced him as a distant cousin who had recently returned to these parts. Although they never caught them together, they saw their mother downstairs so often in the mornings that they assumed they slept together. Eventually, Mom demanded that we start calling him Uncle, Linda says. I bluntly told them he was not related to either of us. There was a look of shock on my daughter's faces. I explained that Jack was apparently their mother's longtime lover. As a result, we were going through a divorce. Since I was a trucker, I explained that there was no way I would be able to get primary custody, which meant they would have to stay with their mother until I found a new job. Then, I would go to court to try to get sole custody of them. The school counselor said everything I explained was true. I kissed my daughter goodbye and watched them walk back to their classroom. The school counselor gave me her name and phone number. "Have your attorney contact me so I can testify about what I witnessed," she said. "I've seen too many married men who have been cheated out of their divorce." I went into a flower store and asked for a bouquet of the deadliest flowers they had. I wanted it wrapped and boxed. I had to explain to them that it was a gag gift before they agreed to do it. One of the female employees went to the dumpster and brought back a few pieces. She asked if these would fit. I said they were perfect. She packed them up for me. After bringing them into the house, I put them on the bed, along with the card my daughter signed for Uncle Jake and her doll, which I cut up with her sewing scissors. The tools I wanted to keep, I loaded onto the bed of my truck. After loading the suitcases, I threw a tarp over to cover what I was carrying and tied it down tight. The tools themselves cost a lot of money. A neighbor, a real friend named John Sexsmith, came over and said, "I guess you didn't know about Marcy's second husband, as we've all been led to believe." "Second husband?" I asked. "In a common law marriage," John said. "No, I only found out about him today. It's been going on for at least 3 years. We worked for the same company. I quit today because I want to get sole custody of my daughters, since I will need to prove to the court that I will be there for them every day," I said before continuing. "He wasn't there when I was driving, so there was no way for me to know unless we were home at the same time," I explained. "He's the boss's youngest son. His dad found out today what was going on when I walked in and quit without warning." We talked some more, and he suggested I move my truck out of the driveway and park it in his garage. He figured that if I watched it tonight, I could figure out how I should plan for what would happen later. We could get up before dawn and head out into the darkness before dawn. I thought for a few minutes before agreeing. I'm glad I agreed. I watched my wife, with whom I had lived for 13 years, pull up to the house. Apparently, the car was parked in the shop for service. As soon as she got into the car, she went straight to the bedroom to change into the clothes she wore to work. She stopped when she saw what she was lying on our bed. She was smiling because she thought it was a surprise gift from Jack. Looking through the binoculars, I saw a happy smile appear on her face. She picked up a baby card for their Uncle Jake and set it aside. She reached for the baby doll and picked it up, finding it shattered into pieces. The doll had been her favorite since she'd bought it for Jake. Why is he doing this? Now there was worry on her face. Why would Jack want to go into Heath's bedroom? Doubt appeared on her face. Brushing off the remains of the flower box, she opened it. The smell of 24 rotten red roses wafted over her. For a minute, it looked like she was going to throw up. "Sam!" I realized that she hadn't figured out that I'd found out yet. Her puzzled look told me she didn't understand what Jack was trying to say. I thought she might have thought Jack was ending their relationship. I watched my 2 daughters get off the bus and walk to the front door. Lauren texted me, "Calling you, but don't answer with your voice. We want you to hear what we are saying to our mom. We decided she needs to hear the truth, just like you taught us." I explained to our neighbor John what was going to happen. "When I put you on speakerphone, we will have to be quiet," I said, "so we can both hear it." The girls immediately went to their mother's room, who was still trying to come to terms with what I had done. She still didn't understand my message. After greeting their mother normally, my daughters began to tell me. "Dad called us out of class today because he wanted to talk to us alone," began Linda. I could tell by the look on her face that my daughter had my mother's attention. "We were brought to the school counselor's office. We were puzzled as to why he was there. You said he would be home around 6. That's when he asked Miss Connor to stay," Lauren added. "The first thing he asked us was who Uncle Jack was and how long he had been part of our family. I explained that he was a distant cousin of yours who had moved back to the neighborhood," Linda told me. I saw fear appear on Marcy's face. Now she knew who had left the message on the bed. "Daddy didn't know you had time to finish the 3rd floor while he was on the road. You told us it was a surprise for him." Lauren revealed the secret. "We realize now that it wasn't. We kept our promise to keep your secret, and it was a surprise for Daddy," Linda added. "He told us he didn't know it was over until today," Lauren said. "Mom, you taught us not to lie, but I guess we've learned that lying to everyone in the family is only okay for you." Marcy started to cry, and I could see the tears flowing freely. "Dad didn't know about Uncle Jack renting the 3rd floor from us for over 3 years, Linda stated. "We had to explain to him that while he was away, you never slept on the bed you and Daddy slept on when he was home." "We knew that because it never needed to be made up before you left for work," remarked Lauren. Marcy's face went completely white. Her own daughters had exposed her for her own behavior. Such a simple thing as a made bed was driving her to despair. She always made sure the girls made their beds before starting the day. "We confessed to Daddy that we never caught you with Uncle Jack, but told him that we saw you regularly coming downstairs from the 3rd floor in the mornings when he wasn't home," Lauren explained. "Dad said they would divorce you because Jack is not related to you. He is your mother's longtime lover that she kept from me. Daddy said that my wife and your mother have been using me for a long time to help support his lifestyle they developed, only to fulfill your mother's needs and his. Not for the good of all of us. It shows that my life with her has been a pack of lies. He told us we had to live with you until he found a new job. He was going to start looking, but he quit today because he wants custody of us," Linda added. Later, Miss Connor explained that Daddy had no choice but to quit his job because the court won't grant custody to a long-distance truck driver. "After he said goodbye, we went back to class," explained Linda. Marcy sat on the bed and cried, trying to hold herself together. She knew that everything the girls said was the plain truth. Heath was making the right move, preparing for the fight ahead. Since she was a social worker, he was well aware of what the state would be looking at when the court required them to do an evaluation. "We ended up breaking down, and the school counselor had to take us out of class for the rest of the day," Linda says. "We had a long conversation about all of this while she tried to calm us down. We learned that sleeping with another man while married is adultery, Mom," Lauren said. "Miss Connor says it's the biggest insult a married couple can inflict on another." "It doesn't seem to bother you, or we wouldn't be talking about it," Linda stated. "Miss Connor said she wondered why you thought you could get away with living such a long life with 2 husbands. Marcy said to herself, "I don't have 2 husbands. I have one Heath and a cohabitating lover." Then she looked on the bright side and mentally thought that's how most people see it. Heath realizing that because of his pride, he had no choice but to file for divorce. In his eyes, she was acting like he was nothing but a sucker being used. "Linda and I had a long talk about you sleeping with another man, and we decided that you hated not only Daddy, but both of us because that's the only thing that could explain what you did and why you did it for so long," Lauren said. "Miss Connor said that no man would have done what you did to our father if he had any love or respect for him," Linda said. Marcy was crying so hard that her body was shaking. There was no way she expected to be caught and for her daughters to tell her about it. Their words were strong and cut her like a knife. Her own behavior forced her daughters to grow up. "Before we got on the bus, Miss Connor asked us if we were okay emotionally. If not, she would be happy to take us home. I told her it would be okay because it would give us time to talk," said Linda. "Miss Connor told us she was going to testify about what she heard today if she was asked to do so in court. She said she has no choice because she has seen too many people ruined by other people's lies. Lauren added. We did a lot of whispering to each other on the bus ride home, and we decided some things on our own, Linda stated. Marcy completely lost her composure and buried her head in her hands. Mom, we're only 12 years old, but it won't be long before we're old enough to decide who we want to live with. Miss Connor explained that at 13 we can decide for ourselves who we want to live with, and it will be Dad. Lauren stated firmly. We will go downstairs and call Grandma to come and get us. I'm sure she'll let us stay with her and Grandpa until our dad gets everything sorted out. That way you and Jack will have the whole house to yourselves, said Lauren. Come on, sis. We need to call Grandma and get our things packed. Mom, and one last question. Are you intentionally encouraging our relationship with Uncle Jake to make it easier for us to accept him as your second husband without our father's knowledge? Asked Linda, because it seems like it to the two of us. Marcy was devastated. She just sat there and cried while her daughter went downstairs to call her mother, who lived across town. Her daughters had their father's natural insight. They looked at everything with straightforward logic and drew their own conclusions. I texted Marcy a message. What you found on the bed was made by me. Let your common-law husband know that I will be suing him for joint custody of you and the two children. I watched through binoculars as it dawned on her that when I brought her relationship, lies, and lifestyle cover-ups to court, she would lose all rights regarding her daughters. Marcy realized she had been defeated. There was no happy outcome. If Heath sued and exposed Jack, it would ruin them both. John and I timed it. It was less than 5 minutes before my in-laws showed up. John opened the front door to see if the voices would come through. They did, because the voices were loud enough to be mistaken for screams. My mother-in-law reprimanded Marcy as she took her granddaughters out the front door. But it was my father-in-law who put everything in clear perspective. So much so that there was no doubt as to what he thought of the situation with his daughter. I think since you've cut Heath out of your life, once things settle down between you and Jack, you'll be looking for another long-distance driver to replace Heath. My father-in-law said this in pure anger. Jack has already proven that he thinks so little of you that he allows you to share yourself with others. You have made it clear by your behavior that one man will never be enough. John and I could see that Marcy was devastated by her father's words. She was crying so hard she couldn't speak. We will contact child services in the morning to see how to handle this situation, said Marcy's mother. After all, it was our granddaughters who contacted us and told us why they wanted to leave this home. I'm very proud of them. Someone clearly raised them right, and unfortunately we can't say it's you. John closed the door, walked to the kitchen, and grabbed a couple bottles of cold beer. I followed him. Your daughters got the situation right, Heath. You should be proud of them. John said, To be honest, when the construction crew was working, Marcy told us you needed the money and were going to rent out the 3rd floor. The house and land were paid for. I just took my time because we didn't need it, explained I. I remodeled the house from the 1st floor. So she's been deceiving us from day one. Jack and her planned the whole thing. So where did the money come from? Asked John. Because we haven't received a dime of income from day one for this so-called rental suite. I said, I guess it was taken from Jack's trust fund, and he paid it back. I pulled out my cell phone, selected Marcy's name in my contact list, and hit text. John, let me know if you can find Marcy. I want to send a message, and I need to know what she'll say back. After a couple minutes, he said he found her. She was back in the bedroom and seemed to have calmed down. I said I sent it. It was short. It read, Hey, slut, to everyone calling, Jace Redding and I want to know if because of a long-term relationship with his son, Linda and Lauren are mine or Jack's. Jace is going to file a lawsuit to try to find out. Oh my God, she's lost her mind. She threw the phone at the wall, said John. Now she's lying face down on the bed crying hysterically. John walked back into the kitchen and smiled. What did you text her? I just said that Jace Redding and I wanted to know if Linda and Lauren were Jack or me, I replied. Jace told me that there had been rumors for years that his son was involved with a married woman, and his husband didn't know anything. As a result, I asked a question that should be answered by all concerned. John Smith's face turned white. He knew Redding's reputation. Jace would go to the Supreme Court to find out the truth. I waited a half hour and asked John to watch Marcy again. She was sitting on the couch in the living room. I sent her a 5-minute clip of her giving head, which I had recorded from the TV and ended up showing the face of the man she was servicing. It was good old Uncle Jack. With the question, who filmed that? I waited for a while and then wrote that I had picked up the CD. When I watched it, maybe I would find out. John replied, Marcy has lost her way again. I don't want to know what you said or did, but she threw up all over the living room carpet. I left at 5 in the morning, sending what I had written down the day before to all of our acquaintances, friends, and enemies. With a text that read, "This is what I showed Jace Redding when he asked why I had to leave." The second video was also taken on the same floor as the bedroom, with someone else's help. Neighbors openly said that Jack Redding was Marcy's second husband. Marcy told the neighbors that I had agreed to this meeting. This is not true, I found out yesterday, and planned to file for divorce and sue Jack Redding for many reasons. It was not a good start to the day for most. I pulled into a friendly truck stop on the outskirts of town and ordered myself a trucker's breakfast. I put my truck in a parking spot and could see it from my booth window while I ate. "I'm sorry, Heath. No man deserves what happened to you," said Maureen's younger sister Marcy. "May I join you?" I nodded my head affirmatively, and she sat down across from me. I slowly sipped my hot coffee. "Mom and Dad told me last night. The girls told them everything after they brought them home. Just so you know, we were all dumbfounded by it," explained Maureen. "Please, if you change your phone number, let us know so we don't give it to Marcy." "The phone number will stay the same, Maureen," I said. "I was going to quit after 2 months anyway because my girls are growing up, and I wanted to be home in the evenings when they start their active teenage years." "What was my sister thinking?" Maureen let herself burst out. "There's no way in hell you're going to agree to Marcy having a second husband." "I don't think we'll ever know," I replied. "Maybe it started out as an innocent friendship, but gradually it went where it shouldn't have. Anyway, as far as I can tell, she liked it. From what I've heard, it lasted a lot longer than the 3 years we've heard about." "What do you mean?" asked Maureen. "Jace Redding, when I told him why I was leaving, told me there were rumors that his youngest son had been involved with a married woman for years," I explained. "He asked if Linda and Lauren belonged to Jack." "Oh shit, who else knows?" she asked. I opened Marcy's text messages and let her read what I had sent her last night. Then I showed her what I sent this morning. When she finished looking at it, she had to wipe tears from her eyes. What she knew was bad had gotten worse. Judging by the video, there was another person involved in their relationship. "Everyone will know by the end of the day," I said. "Jace will become a public figure in the search for the truth. It could end up being that both kids are mine, both are Jackie's, or maybe neither of us is the biological father of either of them. The question I'm playing with now is whether the person who shot the video was a man or a woman." Maureen must have seen the tears in my eyes because she stood up and walked over to me to take my hand. We didn't say a word until the waitress took our order. Finally, I had to let go of her hand to eat. Heath and Marcy had gotten married at 19. She was the youngest of the bridesmaids, but even at that age, she was in love with him. He seemed so handsome to her then and now. He drove a long-distance truck so Marcy could continue her university studies. When she graduated and applied for a job with the state, she was offered 3 or 4 places, but she chose the one in her hometown. Now she knew why: to be near her first love Jack, of whom their parents had never approved. Maureen looked at Heath and sensed that he couldn't accept it yet. When Health was home, she spent as much of her free time with them as possible. Heath was an honest man who always treated her as an equal. When she had difficulties, he was the one she turned to. He taught her to look at a situation from all angles, which made big problems become small ones. She had no trouble falling in love with him. He was so real to her that every man who tried to court her since then had to meet the standards he set. Her parents wanted her to marry, but Maureen couldn't tell them she loved another, and always had. He was a faithful man who never looked at another woman. She just had to find a way to keep Heath in her life. When the time came, she would make her move and prove to him forever that he had married the wrong sister. "Heath, do you know where you're going to live yet?" Maureen asked. Linda and Lauren have asked Mom and Dad to take them in. They are angry, upset, and determined, but they are so proud of their dad. "Dad, the girls have told Mom and Dad that they will tell the court that they want to live with you," she said. "Mommy and Daddy have explained to them that you are doing the right thing in the long term. I can bring them to you on weekends so you can see them if you want." I opened my notes and gave her the address of the farm. "My father and I have started building a bar and store next to this place. I'll be staying with the tenant of the farm we own," I said. "I'll have to check with them before I can answer your question. We are building a large 2-bedroom apartment that I will be living in." "Why there?" asked Maureen. "We have 10 acres on either side of the intersection that we plan to subdivide into 3/4-acre lots after we build it up," I explained. "If we need to, we can take another part of the farm. There's nothing in the neighborhood, so the store will be convenient to a lot of people and will be a point of attraction." "How did you find it?" asked Maureen. "According to Google Maps, there's nothing nearby." "I drove across the country to save time," I explained. "There was a lot of traffic on the road. I noticed a 4-way stop sign and followed it. The flow of traffic could support the business." After we finished our meal, I picked up my ticket. Maureen leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, as she always did. It made me smile. "Don't forget about Heath," Maureen said. "Many of us have always loved you for being who you are." While driving, I called my dad and explained everything. He said he would find me the best divorce lawyer. I clocked the mileage to where I was going, a total of 75 miles. It was just over 8:30 when I pulled up to the construction site. I smiled when I saw it because my dad was going to build a big house. There would be 8 pumps for passenger cars and small trucks, and 2 for the big trucks on the far right side. Already the pits had been dug, and blocks had been installed for the leak collection system in case the tank started leaking. Construction had begun on the floor, and concrete needed for the steel supports. I walked into the construction trailer and saw the project my father was working on. It was the same as all the others, except for the 24-square-foot apartment on top. I smiled too, because that meant he saw the potential of the neighborhood. About 2 hours later, I headed out to the farm. Bill Robinson came out to greet me. He liked my restored old Ford truck. Those were the days when speed, weight, and solid metal were paramount. Mrs. was about to serve lunch, and I was told to stop by. Mrs., as Bill called her, made a typical farmer's lunch, and she was delighted with how much I ate. After the meal, I started helping her clean up. While she cleaned up the leftovers, I took care of the dishes. She noticed that I was no longer wearing my wedding ring. By the time I wiped them down and she put them away, a fresh pot of ground coffee was ready. I spent the next 2 hours explaining how the last 2 days had gone. Bill said the girls and their aunt would be welcome here. It would be nice to have young people around again. I will have someone to grill for. I wrote Maureen and said you can come every Friday night and go home on Sunday. She replied that it was a date. Thursday afternoon, I looked at the disk on my laptop. Not a single face had appeared on it during the entire shoot. Using my cell phone as a Wi-Fi feed, I sent my dad everything, including Miss Connor's address and phone number. I told him to contact Jace Redding to find out where and when Jack would be, and to get him served as soon as possible. Marcy can be served at the city's social services office. I even sent a video file downloaded from the disk. Out of pure spite, I texted Macy to say I had watched the entire video and said there was nothing special about it. The other sluts performed better. Maureen was a tax major. Luckily, it was the slowest part of the year. As soon as the girls were done with school, they would hit the road. She laughed as she watched them text their father every 10 to 15 minutes. The 75-mile trip went by quickly. When they reached the construction site, they wrote one last message. They drove down the road until they saw him standing at the end of the driveway waiting for them. Linda and Lauren jumped out of Maureen's car and rushed into my arms. Bill and Mrs. were introduced to each other. I finally learned that her name was Betty. The girls loved the room Betty had prepared for them. Bill showed everyone their rooms while Betty finished cooking a huge dinner. When we were done eating dinner, I got to work cleaning up. Betty watched as my daughters and I washed the dishes so she could put them away. Bill told the girls about the huge swings, the swimming pond, and the little bikes they could learn to ride if I let them. I was worried about what they would do, but Bill and Betty had it all planned out. After the kids went to bed, Maureen and I got to talking. "Heath, it's been a crazy couple days. All hell broke loose," Maureen said. "Everything comes out. Jack was a boy she secretly dated when we were growing up. That's how long they were involved with each other." "That explains a lot," I said. "I was safe and secure. Jack had a wild side that she secretly cherished. She didn't know he knew it, and he used it to his advantage. Jack would run away and leave Marcy with something she didn't deserve. Mom and Dad have talked to child services, and if you give them written permission, they will be allowed to keep them until you find a place," Maureen explained. "They also talked to the children privately, and afterward, we were all told that there was no way Marcy, because of the lifestyle she was leading, could be recommended for foster care." Maureen looked at me and saw tears streaming down my face. It finally got to me. I told her to leave and let me handle it, but she refused and stayed with me. Marcy sat at the kitchen table and reflected on the last 2 days. Thursday had been a quiet day. Today, however, was different. Jace Redding had come to see her while she was at work. He was taking her to court. He wanted to know if there was a direct DNA link between her daughters and him. Truth be told, it had been so many years since the twins had been conceived that she no longer remembered anything. Heath had warned her of the impending battle, but after the initial shock, she'd written it off as him just being angry. What really threw her off was the message Heath had sent out to all their friends and family. She had never considered Jack to be her second husband, but as she had learned today from her lawyer, legally he was. From the day she moved Jack into her home, he had been in a common-law marriage with her. Legally, after the first year, they had the same rights as a married couple. So by suing Jack, Heath expected to succeed. The only question was how much he would be awarded. The lawyer said that Heath would be treated very favorably in divorce court because he had been wronged for so long. If she had been collecting rent for the last 3 years and could prove it with monthly bank statements, things might have been different. As it was, there was no evidence that he had made any contribution to household expenses. Thus, the court would have found him to be a kept man. The real bombshell was the end of the job. Her supervisor called her into the office and laid it all out. On Thursday after hours, she went to see Mrs. and Mr. Klaus Rubenstein at their request to settle a custody matter. They explained what had happened the night before and asked the state for guidance for the future. After talking to the children, I told the grandparents that if they didn't get involved in the case, I told the grandparents that if they get written permission for childcare from the father, we will accept them as temporary guardians until the case is resolved. "I know they are your parents," her supervisor said. "Marcy, I can't transfer you now, but as soon as a spot becomes available, I will. I can't fire you or terminate you, but your effectiveness as a social worker in this area has come to naught. No one will take your word for it, so you will be permanently assigned to an office job, and you will have to delegate your current cases to others." She said this with disgust. Marcy realized she had no one to blame but herself. It was her choice, and hers alone, to continue to pursue Jack. It had finally dawned on her that everything we do has consequences. Saturday was a busy day, and Linda and Lauren were on the lookout. It was fun listening to him explain to my daughters what they could and couldn't do with the little bikes they were standing near. It was amazing to watch them do it. After 2 hours, Bill said that was enough for today because their bodies would be stiff and sore. Seeing that they were sweating, he said, "Go ahead and take a dip in the pond." Betty and Maureen came closer. About 4 girls were called in to help prepare part of the dinner. I had to check on them because they had never done it before. The 4 ladies were sitting at the kitchen table cutting onions for 2 entrees and peeling hot-boiled potatoes for potato salad. Bill started heating up the barbecue, preparing to cook the steaks he had defrosted. I helped him where I could. We ate the steaks, potato salad, and baked beans outdoors at the picnic table. Interestingly, we didn't use the TV or cell phones once all day. It was as if the twins were discovering a new life. The girls decided they wanted to go to bed early because they were tired. The 4 of us sat around drinking beer and playing cards until night fell. Sunday afternoon, they went home. Maureen got a handwritten letter, certified by Billy and Betty, giving them the necessary permissions. Klaus Rubenstein called me early Monday morning to thank me for getting the letter to him as quickly as possible. He personally carried it to the office. The supervisor copied it for his records and then issued him a legal notice to show all concerned that they were the legal guardians of his granddaughter. We delved into the history of his daughter and Jack. I ended up learning a lot of things I didn't know. The following Friday morning, Jake Redding was in Austin, Texas, picking up a load of sterilized medical equipment when he was served. That same morning, just after the social services office opened, Marcy was served. I received a text message from Maureen asking me to measure my waist circumference. I asked why. She replied so we could swim in the pond with the kids. I answered 34. I was taking an early evening walk when notifications buzzed on my cell phone. It was a message from Marcy. It read, "You've calmed down enough to talk." I replied, "There's nothing to say about your parents," and Maureen told me the whole story from the secret meeting with him to today. I'm trying to answer myself the question, if he was always your one and only, why did you marry me? Unsurprisingly, I didn't get any answer. I don't know who was more excited when Maureen arrived with the kids, the 3 of us or the 3 of them. Maureen looks absolutely stunning. Her smile alone was infectious. As they hugged me, the girls quietly asked me a question to which I answered yes, but only if they agreed. As they headed out to greet Bill and Betty, Maureen kissed me hard on the lips, taking me by surprise. I told Maureen that she should listen to the girls, and we turned in their direction. Somehow, Maureen slipped her hand into mine. "We were wondering," Lauren said. "Can we call you grandparents?" added Linda. Of course they agreed, but what surprised us was that Betty's tears flowed. We later learned that they didn't have children because she was never able to get pregnant. This simple request from my daughters were words she thought she would never hear in her life. After dinner, I told Maureen that it was confirmed that both Marcy and Jack Redding had been served. Then I showed her the last message from Marcy and my response. "You know my sister can't explain her act," Maureen said. "Because if she did, she would have to admit the truth about herself." "Enough about your sister, Maureen," I replied. "When are you going to find a man who can love you the way you deserve to be loved?" "Don't be surprised, but I have already found him." She replied, "My problem is getting him to realize it." Bill and I were both up early, so we sat outside in the morning drinking fresh coffee. "Heath, Betty is my second wife," he said. "The first I was married to her sister who did to me what Marcy did to you." "Are you telling me why?" I asked. "Don't let your resentment keep you from seeing what's in front of you. Maureen has been by your side since day one. When you're ready, be sure to ask yourself why." It was then that I began to understand. Maureen was a best friend. Did she want more than that? If so, why? "Bill, what made you realize Betty was interested in you?" I asked. "A cast iron skillet over my head." He laughed. "After she caught a neighborhood girl trying to flirt with me. Since we didn't have kids of our own, we took in foster kids for a few years." Our conversation ended because we heard voices as the rest of the family perked up. After the twins had been riding motorcycles for 3 hours, it was time to go swimming. So we all went. Bill and Betty brought lounge chairs for us to watch a little beach ball game. Later, we headed back to change for dinner. As soon as we entered the house, Betty knew right away. "Brennan, looks like things are starting to work out the way you prompted him?" asked Betty, grinning widely. "Not her. I told Heath about your unholy right with the cast-iron skillet," Bill grinned. The twins heard his words, and he had to tell them the story of how they ended up together. After dinner, the twins went to bed. The fresh air and nature had exhausted them. I was sitting on the back porch on the cushioned swing when Maureen came out and sat next to me. I hugged her and she leaned against me and said, "Mom figured it out when I brought the twins home last week. She thought I was happier than I'd ever been in years. I guess my poker face wasn't as good as I thought it would be." "How did she take it?" I said. "She must have been very concerned about everything that was going on." "Brett," she asked if it had gotten to the point where something was going on, Maureen said. I honestly answered that it hadn't. Then she asked, "How long have you been in love with him?" I replied that since the summer they got married. "Wow, that long, and it took me all that time to notice," I said. "I expected a big lecture from her," said Maureen. "But she said that if it worked out, I'd get your father to agree." Then she explained that our father was thrown out by her older sister. She thanks her for that every day. I was kissing Maureen goodbye Sunday afternoon when Lauren told Linda, who looked shocked. Aunt Maureen had loved Daddy for many years. It took what Mom did to Dad for him to realize that. If Maureen got her way, they would get married as soon as he was divorced. As they drove away, I asked myself, how did my daughter know? "Heath," Bill said, "let's take a little walk. I have an idea I want to pitch to you." We walked out of the property to the road over a bridge spanning a small creek and crossed to the other side of the property. There was a nice piece of land that had originally been part of the house grounds. "This would be the perfect place for a house, don't you think?" Bill said. "Lauren and Linda could come here whenever they wanted to ride their bikes or buy horses." "Whose idea was that?" I asked. "Betty and Maureen early this morning." He laughed. "They're going to pitch the idea to you next week." Klaus called me Monday morning. Jace Redding had gotten a court order to draw blood from Lauren and Linda. I had to explain to him what I knew. He was shocked to learn that there was a paternity issue. Up until that point, he believed that Marcy had simply been in a relationship with him for the past 3 years. He was so upset by this discovery that he went into social services and told his daughter in front of everyone that as far as he was concerned, she was dead in his eyes. I spoke to my mother-in-law, who informed me that Miss Connor told her that she had provided a notarized statement from my attorney. "Jack is due back in town on Wednesday. Do you think you should be around to see what's going on? You're welcome to stay here." I told her I would think about it. I called John Sexsmith and asked if I could slip in and stay at his house Tuesday night. He agreed because he had something to share with me. Bill suggested I take his car so no one would recognize it. I said I would take it, but only if he would take the truck and take his wife out for a day on the town. He laughed and said, "You're pretty smart for a young guy." Dusk was already falling when I slipped out into town. I called John to make sure he was home before pulling into his driveway. It seemed that since I'd left, another gentleman had been making regular appearances at Marcy's house. At this point, he was outside the house. When I looked through John's binoculars, I recognized his face immediately. It was Jack's older married brother. Jace Redding was surprised to hear from me. I said I needed to see him and gave him the address where I was staying. When he showed up, I gave him the key to my house, saying that he had to see it to believe what I had found out. I told him that I had found out who had been filming Jack and Marcy. They were now together in a bedroom on the 3rd floor. John and I watched as he walked up to my front door. Using the key, he entered. "What do you think he'll do when he finds out who he is?" John asked. John. "Jace Redding is a proud man. It all depends on what his pride pushes him to do," I replied. "I hope he doesn't cross the line." We were just sitting in the kitchen when we heard the sound of gunfire. We feared the worst. John called 911. When the police, fire department, and ambulance arrived, we went outside and watched the scene. John and I couldn't stop laughing. It was funny to us to see a half-naked Marcy and Jason's brother Jack in handcuffs. We got worried when we saw Jace Redding being carried out on a cot. John pulled out a police scanner and set it up. We learned that Jace had broken into a third-floor bedroom and Jason had shot him, thinking it was a burglary. Jace was transported with a shoulder wound. We walked outside and Marcy noticed she was already wearing clothes. She looked at me, standing across the street, and her face turned white. The situation was getting worse and worse for her. John told me that I couldn't believe she was involved with both brothers. I replied that I knew there was a third, but I didn't know who. I feel sorry for Jace. He doesn't deserve this. No one does. At 6 o'clock on Wednesday morning, I pulled up to my relative's house. Klaus Rubenstein was already up and ready for a new day. He opened the door before I even left the house. Over coffee, while no one was up yet, I told him about what had happened last night. His wife Rose was stunned to see me, but immediately gave me a big hug. It wasn't long before my daughters came downstairs, fully dressed. Both were thrilled to see me. Of course, I drove them to school and then back to my in-laws' house. Klaus left for work. Rosa and I had a long talk about both of her daughters. She and I came to the consensus that Marcy never loved me. I stopped by Jace Redding, who was vacationing with his wife nearby. When she was introduced to me, she stood up and started panting as I enclosed her in a hug. Jace heard me tell her not to feel responsible for their children's stupidity. Jace smiled and said, "Heath has always taken things personally. I can tell you one thing, I never saw him lose his temper." "I came close a few times," I said. "I felt like if I ever lost my temper, I'd kill someone." Jace laughed. "Jason's in jail. Jack's facing bankruptcy since he lost his credibility. We don't know what Jason's wife is going to do. It's a real mess. And then there's you. Do you want to come back as manager?" I had to decline because as much as I tried to explain, I had a new attitude toward life. I went to the transportation center and watched Jack sign in and out for the last time. Jace told me he was supposed to arrive in about an hour. Watching him drive away in anger was very amusing. Knowing his explosive temper, I called John Sexsmith and asked him to watch my house because I expected trouble. Maureen was just closing up for the night when a secretary walked into her office. "There's a handsome gentleman here to see you. He is holding a dozen red roses," she said. "He wants to know if you would like to have dinner." Maureen followed her out, wondering who it could be. If I had any doubts about how Maureen felt, they were dispelled when she saw me. The tears that appeared in her eyes showed everything. I followed her to her apartment, and after she parked, we went to Outback for their signature steak and shrimp. We snacked on their blooming onion and had a couple cocktails each. We had just finished our meal when John called. Jack had gotten home before Marcy and was waiting for her. The drink he had consumed while he waited for her only fueled his anger. His father was in the hospital, his brother was in jail, and he himself had just lost his job. He came to the conclusion that it was all Marcy's fault. He was waiting for her with a gun in his hand when she walked through the door. A neighbor, hearing gunshots, repeatedly called the police. Marcy was in poor condition and was rushed to the emergency room. John said things didn't look good. I reported this to Maureen, who called her mother and father. We met them at the hospital. 6 hours later, we learned that she had died on the operating table. There was too much internal bleeding. I called Bill and his missus to let them know what was going on and that I would go on Friday to return his car and pick up my truck. It was hard to tell the twins about their mother's death. Klaus and I decided to keep the casket closed while we picked it out. I had to think that because of the behavior of 111, lives were changed forever. No one ever thinks about the fact that our actions can have consequences. We were walking back from the burial site when Klaus took me aside. "Heath, there is no relationship between Jace Redding and the kids," Klaus said softly. "More importantly, how long has Maureen been in love with you?" "According to your wife, since the summer Marcy and I got married," I replied. "Did she also tell you that her sister left me over 35 years ago?" said Klaus. I am to this day grateful to her for that. If things work out with you and Maureen, you have my support. At that moment, I began to rebuild my life. 5 years have passed. I watch Linda and Lauren waiting for the bus. Maureen, my wife, is busy with our 2 preschoolers. Bill and Betty have become grandparents. The gas station and store have become the center of the village. We now have our own post office. In warm weather, I walk to work from the house we built by the pond. Jace Redding and his wife often stop by. His oldest son's ex-wife lives here with the kids. Jack got 10 to 25 years for involuntary manslaughter. Jason eventually had his sentence reduced to a misdemeanor. As for the name of our part of the world, it came about because Bill drew a sign that read, "We are all here because of circumstances," and attached it to the 4 corners. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.